Christian parenting. I'm Julie Lyles-Carr. You're listening to the All Mom Does podcast, part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Acting in Africa writes, Julie is my go-to mom podcast at the All Mom Does podcast. I'm always inspired and enriched by both the topics and the guests she brings on her show. That's a real-life mom who has been impacted by this show, someone who is likely in the same shoes as you are, realizing that it's not about being a perfect parent, but being a parent who trusts in a perfect Heavenly Father. Did you know that this show is brought to you in part by our friends and partners over at ChristianParenting.org? They are reaching over 500,000 parents on a monthly basis with podcasts just like the All Mom Does podcast by offering practical help and spiritual guidance to parents just like you. And I want to encourage you today that you can help partner in this to pay it forward for other parents to have access to podcasts like this one. When you give at Christian Parenting Podcast Network at www.cpgive.org, that's www.cpgive.org, your gift will be doubled thanks to a generous donor who said that they will do a matching grant for any funds that come in. So as we come into the end of the year, as you've enjoyed being with us on the podcast this year, I would love to encourage you to pay it forward, help other parents have access to the same kind of encouragement and inspiration you found here at the All Mom Does podcast by giving to the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. That's cpgive.org. Today on the All Mom Does podcast, I'm your host, Julie Lyles-Carr. Caitlin Henderson is joining me from the wilds of Kansas. That's right. She is someone who actually lives out part of that American dream of being on a farm, and she has developed such a following, is so beloved by people talking about her experience and what life is like living in that kind of a lifestyle. Caitlin, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Tell the listeners how many kids there are, where in Kansas, what kind of farming you do, the husband's name, all of that.
Okay, so I am married to Jake, and we have been married almost 9 years. It'll be 9 years next month. And we have 3 little farm kiddos. We've got 2 boys and a girl. They are 8, 5, and 3. So our hands are full right now, and we live out on our farm in south central Kansas. We grow wheat, cotton, soybeans, milo, and then we also have a herd of cows. So we've got a lot going on out here.
Absolutely. I have driven through your area of the country many times. My husband and I lived in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for quite a while. And for many years of that, my parents were living in Utah. And so we would start out and pack the Suburban with all the kids and all the things. And then we would make the drive through Kansas, which honestly, Caitlin, sometimes felt like a really, really long drive all through that southern portion of Kansas. We did have an experience. It was crazy. One time we were driving through and there was a fire on one side, fields were burning, and on the other side was one of those epic thunderstorms that you knew was probably going to go tornadic. And it was a real choice, like, do we stay with the burn on this side or do we go over to the tornado on this side? It was kind of hard to choose. So talk to me about, you have really resonated with a whole generation of people who are very fascinated with the life that you're living. And yet it's one that for any of us who read Little House on the Prairie or who grew up near more agrarian areas, it's one that is still very vibrant and part of the American culture today. So how was that for you when you first started getting into the digital space and writing about your experience and what it was like living on the farm to find people who were finding your life so fascinating?
Yeah, it was really funny to me at first because around us, that's what everyone does almost.
Right, right.
Everyone farms, everyone ranches. It's just the life out here in the Midwest. And so writing online and reaching these people who are in the heart of these big cities, and it was so foreign to them. And it was almost hard for them to believe sometimes that people still lived like this, that, it's such a different world. And so people would be like, you really have cows like out in your backyard and you drive
real cows
tractors and and they were just like, what in the world? Because for so many people, they'll never get to experience anything like this. They might see something on TV or read about it online, but it's such a different way of life that it's very interesting to them. Whereas to me, it's like, well, yeah, this is just what we do.
Yeah, exactly. So, how do you think it's been for you as a woman who's been raised in this generation? And yes, you have lots of people around you who this is the lifestyle they've engaged in, but in some ways, our world does get a little bit smaller, right? Because we do have digital access to one another. We do have this ability to share what our lives are like wherever it is that we're living and what that lifestyle means. So, how has it been for you trying to navigate and negotiate having the kids and all of that, but also being an active partner and helping run this farm with also some of the cultural expectations that, women are working out of the home more. Women and their spouses have been working outside of the home. And of course, now we're in a season where everybody's home, but you've been living that way for a while and working with your spouse. So how has that been, keeping both a pulse on the world that is centered around these large urban areas and at the same time embracing the lifestyle that is yours?
I think a lot of it comes down to personal connection, that I've made these connections and developed these relationships with friends now who are in these areas. And it's not just what I'm seeing on social media, but I'm actually talking to friends who that is their way of life.
Right.
And then I'm sharing my way of life. And, we have these conversations that are so interesting because they're so different. And, you see everything that's going on culturally. And yet out here, our day to day, we still have to feed the cows every day. We still have to get the crops harvested. I mean, we have so much going on out here. And honestly, we have so much on our plates every day that I don't even have that much time to think about what my role is. We just jump in and get it done. We've got so much going on in this season. We're getting ready. Our cows are going to be having calves soon, which is crazy. Right now, we're trying to get crops harvested. And my role changes from day to day. And it's just so crazy that I really don't even think too much about it. I just jump in and do what's needed, whatever that may be.
Right. Do you think that's one of the keys to keeping life a little bit simpler, is to not burden ourselves with this constant view of, well, how is this person over here living, and what are the things that they're buying, and how are they designing their days? And, I know there's value in gathering wisdom for how other people live and how other people are walking out their lives, but do we sometimes overcomplicate our own lives when we don't remain fully present? And, part of you living on the farm is, you're right. I mean, you are moving from task to task. You've got stuff in front of you all the time, which sort of eliminates or reduces some of that comparison time. Is that one way that we make our lives more complex?
I really think it is. I talk a lot about the simple life out here. And I always have to clarify that, because when I say that our life is maybe more simple, our days are packed. We work, I say we, my husband, especially in harvest, they're working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. It is nonstop. So I don't mean simple in that our schedules are simple or that sort of thing, but just that the overall atmosphere is, we don't focus on all these things that we feel don't matter in the long run. Mm-hmm. We are just trying to live the life that God has called us to live, to be good stewards to our children, to our land, to our animals, and just try to live this simple life that is rooted in the gospel, and just trying to stay focused on that.
I think you touch on something that's really important. Often for a lot of us who live in more urban centers, or even if we have lived in smaller towns, but we look at the lifestyle of living out in the country and having some land and all of that, it can be really easy to over-romanticize that, right? Because what you're describing, certainly my husband and I have been through seasons that have been the 18-hour days and the 7 days a week and all of the things and building businesses, and you're still running a business. That's one of the things that's kind of interesting, that we lose track of that. What are some of the things that you think people don't completely understand or over romanticize when it comes to living a lifestyle that is outside of, an urban experience or outside of a town experience?
First, I have to admit that I even have the tendency to over romanticize this sometimes. I always talk about how I go to my front porch and I drink my coffee and I watch our cattle graze in the pasture, and it's so peaceful. And that is really true, but that's just a small 10-minute clip from my day. And it is very easy to over-romanticize it. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that there is so much that goes into farming in this way of life that is actually so modern. The technology that we use in our equipment, the math, the precision that we have to have. I think a lot of time people envision farmers and they think of this old time tractor with this farmer in his overalls and he's out there plowing up the ground in a tractor that has no cab. And really, that's not it at all. I mean, these tractors are so modern, and people really are surprised after I talk to them and they realize like how much goes into this and how up to date we are on technology and all of these things that really go into raising a crop.
Right, right. And farming is not necessarily some squeaky clean, safe kind of experience. I mean, you have talked about, and this is a very interesting stat. Tell us the stat about cows versus sharks.
So cows actually kill more people every year than sharks do.
Wow. And we don't talk, there's no cattle week. I don't see this on Discovery Channel. What is going on?
Do you think they talk about it?
Yeah. And so are people surprised when they hear statistics like that from you? Because again, in that over romanticization of country life, we can miss the part where it is, yes, a modern industry, and it does have technology and it does have dangers.
Yeah, it is a very dangerous profession. And when we are in calving season and we are really in the thick of working with our cattle, I am very cautious. I do worry a lot about my husband if he is out there by himself, just because our cattle aren't mean, but they weigh 1,400 pounds. So right. Things can happen very easily. And, when we go to feed our cattle, you're standing in between a 1,400 pound animal and the food that they want to eat. So right. Even if they aren't trying to be mean, it's so easy to get knocked down or stepped on. And I was not raised around cattle. So marrying a farmer and coming onto the farm and then being around the cattle was a huge fear that I had to overcome. Sometimes I still have to work on that a little bit. I'm much better than I was 9 years ago. But yeah, like you said, that is something that is over romanticized for sure, that there is a lot of danger working on the farm, and there is a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's a lot of things that you have to be cautious about and account for.
So you mentioned this, that it had not necessarily been your life's ambition to marry a farmer and move out to the middle of South Central Kansas. So talk about that and how you were able to embrace that as the story that God had for you. Because for a lot of us, we, from the time we're very young, are raised with the question and a narrative surrounding who do you want to be when you grow up, and where do you want to live, and who's the kind of person you want to marry, and what is your list for the things that you want to accomplish, and who is the kind of person you want as a partner, and all of that. And, ranching and farming is a very specific way of life. So how did that all happen?
I want to be a farmer's wife when I grow up. Those words never came out of my mouth. At the same time, such a farming community, it was never something that I said, oh, I will never marry a farmer. But it really wasn't where I saw myself ending up. And I am always very honest about the fact that it took me several years of living on this farm to really embrace it. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of resentment for this farm because of the hours and the time and the money that we had to invest and that my husband spent working on this farm, that there was a lot of resentment I had to work through. And this way of life did not come easily to me whatsoever. And it was a rough transition. But over the years, I feel like God has really taken so many things that have happened on this farm and just things that I see every day and just brought some beautiful lessons out of them and really just shaped my heart to where now I can truly say there is nowhere else I would rather live or no other lifestyle that I would rather be in than on the farm.
Wow. I mean, that is something to really consider, because I love setting out goals and I love thinking through things. And we are definitely talking. We have two of our kids who are married, one who's in a very serious relationship. So we've already transitioned into some of those stages of parenthood, but certainly we have had the conversations with our kids about who do you think you want to be married to and what do you think that you want that lifestyle to look like? And so to see someone navigate for love and for romance and for marriage, making that transition and to have such transparency with that about the challenge of that is really, really a beautiful thing, Caitlin. I appreciate how vulnerably you speak about it. Now, I had a question for you. When it comes to, yes, farming's become more modern and there is technology and there are ways in which we are able to make the crops even more productive and all the things, but you are still really hinged to something over which you have no control, which is the weather. And so even though a lot of us in more indoor kind of careers and all of that thing might not recognize it, I know that you can recognize it within your own industry that you're in, the absolute reliance on God you have to have, because you do have something like weather is the thing that's trying to carry you in terms of making sure that business is a success. But I think for a lot of us who would say, gosh, I don't know how people live like that. That just seems so uncertain and unsure, all the work. And then we have something like the pandemic hit and you begin to realize, oh, even my office job can have some challenges and some seasonal things happen that nobody saw coming. What for you is the correlation of all that? And how did you learn to live within the rhythm of seasons, of weather cycles that you can't control? How did you learn to lean into that?
So a few years ago, I remember one day we were walking out in our wheat field, and this baby wheat is supposed to be, at the time it was only a few inches tall, and it is supposed to be soft and green, and we had not gotten rain in months, and we were walking through this field and the wheat was crunching under our feet. I just remember feeling so defeated and thinking, why is the rain not coming? You know, when our entire livelihood is based on raising a crop and selling that crop, and we don't have rain to get any of these crops to grow, you know, the stress and the worry that puts on you is just, it's such a heavy weight, but at the same time, I can't make the rain come.
Right.
And so I feel like the big lesson in all of this is that we've got to have faith in it, that eventually the rain came. Eventually the drought ended. It didn't come in our time, but God still brought the rains. And I feel like there is so much that we don't have control of here on the farm and everywhere, especially through this pandemic. So many people are realizing we don't have as much control as we thought we did.
Yep.
And I think, you know, we can either try to cling to that control, but really it's just kind of a false security thing. And we don't have the control, even if we are trying so hard to grip what we feel is control. Ultimately, we're really not in control. And all that's doing is just putting this weight on us that we were never meant to carry.
Right. You've said that you, for many years, used to ask yourself, what if, all the time, that you had a what if dialogue going on in your head. And that was the way that you looked at a lot of things. And that now you have changed away from that what if statement to something else that you feel is far more beneficial. So unpack what if meant to you and how it was keeping you in a particular loop and how you now have transitioned to something that you feel like is a far better statement to make over your life.
Yes. So I love this because I used to be the person that I could tell you 100 ways that a situation could go wrong. I was the worrier. I was so overprotective of my kids, my husband, even just every situation. I would say, what if this happens? What if this goes wrong? You know, a million scenarios of what if would play in my mind. And I feel like God just shifted my heart. And one day I just felt like he was saying, but even if every situation now, if I start saying, what if this, then I always reply to myself, even if this happens, is God still good? And not once have I been able to say no to that, because any what if situation that I can come up with in my mind that could go wrong, if I answer that with, even if, is God still good? The answer will always be yes.
Wow, what a great way to reposition the way that we traffic in the things that we worry about and the places that we try to see forward and what the outcome would be, to say even if. What a beautiful way to look at that. So we've established that, yeah, living out on the farm isn't quite as simple as people might think. It is not necessarily as rustic or as old-fashioned, that there are a lot of modern worries and modern technologies and modern things and schedules and all the rest that have to play a part in your life. And And yet at the same time, you have established that there is a rhythm to it that does make things a little bit simpler. How have you embraced this message of simplicity for your family, and how did it become a heartbeat for a lot of the women that you're interacting with on social media across the country who may live a very different lifestyle than you, but you know that their heart to some degree, that the answer for a lot of things that they're struggling with is simply to make life a little more simple?
A few years ago, we were in the middle of harvest, which is by far our busiest time of year. And I remember our oldest son at the time would have been about 5 or 6. And I had to make the choice to pull him out of an activity because our family was stretched so thin and I felt like I was going to break. And I just had to make that choice. And I felt so much guilt. I felt like such a bad mom that I was taking away from his childhood by pulling him from this just one activity. He was still in others. And I did that. And we ended up having the most incredible summer as a family. We simplified our schedules. We took some things off of our plates that weren't top priority. And we spent the summer as a family really crammed inside the cab of a combine for a lot of hours. Yeah. But that kind of opened my eyes to the fact that I think sometimes we get so busy trying to create this amazing experience for our children that we forget to just enjoy them where we are, that we don't have to cultivate all these things to give them a great childhood. You know, I remember when I was little sitting on my front porch with my grandparents talking. I mean, such a simple memory, but ones that stick in my mind. And now after kind of transforming our family and how we parent and kind of really grasping this concept of embracing this simple way of life and really prioritizing the things that we allow our family to do and the way that we spend our time has really opened my eyes to there is so much joy in these simple everyday moments that we don't necessarily have to try to create them. They are already right there if we just learn to embrace them right where we're at.
You know, some of my favorite memories are going down to my grandparents' house in Mississippi. I did not grow up in Mississippi, but we would return in the summers and going fishing with my grandparents, either at a pond or in the Gulf. I can remember my other grandmother had a game closet, and it was just the most magical game closet ever, even though we had a game closet back in our house outside of Los Angeles. And you're right. It was those kinds of moments that really seeded for me those great memories with extended family, the simple things. And yet I can fall into the trap as a mom feeling like I'm responsible. I'm the cruise director for trying to curate and develop experiences that take an awful lot of energy, an awful lot of time, and sometimes a lot of finance. How do we get off that hamster wheel? Because I know I've got moms listening to you going, well, that all sounds great, but Caitlin, you don't understand. If they don't go to gymnastics, blah, 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 or they don't go to T-ball, da, 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 then they'll never make it to the next level of yada, yada. How do we get ourselves out of that loop that we often overcommittedly get ourselves into?
I think, first of all, it's so hard. It is truly hard to take that first step because you do feel like a failure almost because society kind of says we go, go, go. And so when you make the choice to step back a little bit, you kind of wonder, am I doing it wrong? But I also think it's different for every family. You know, not every family is going to have the same priorities or schedules or activities that another family might have, and that's okay. So I really think it takes sitting down and looking at your schedules and saying, is there something on my schedule that is hurting my family more than it is helping my family? Because I feel like there is this scale and eventually it's going to tip and we're going to have too much on our plates. And then we're going to wonder why we are so overwhelmed and stressed and running from place to place and not really being able to just enjoy life. I don't want to be so busy doing things that I don't just to get to enjoy where I'm at. But I think that it is different for every family and you just have to sit down and prioritize. And even if you can take one thing off your plate, just start with one thing. I really think that so many parents will realize the benefit in that, and then it will become easier to just slowly weed out what isn't a top priority. And I think what so many parents will realize is that, yes, you are giving up something good, but in exchange, you are getting something great. And I think it's just so important, and it's such a good thing to learn.
Tell me about the beauty of boredom. I think some people may hear about, oh my goodness, living several miles outside of a smaller town, in a farm lifestyle. And, oh, I think my kids would be bored. I think that I would be bored. And yet we often overcommit and make our lives overly complex, almost out of a fear of ever having, well, what if we get bored? So what are the beauties of simplifying your life, simplifying your kid schedule enough to leave room for what I kind of think is a luxury item called bored?
Yeah. So I get wide eyes when I talk to somebody from a city and I tell them that we live over an hour from a Target or a Starbucks. They're like,
what are you talking about?
But I think people think that they would get bored easily. But truly, we live on about 100 acres. There is no shortage of things to do. And I have found that kids come up with the coolest ideas when they are bored. They are so creative. And I think when we don't structure every minute of their day, it allows that creativity to come out in them. And like our kids, they are outside. I mean, I have to drag them inside at night. They love to be outdoors. And I love to just sit and watch them because they know more than I could ever give them credit for. They are so much more creative. They are problem solving on their own. And I think we don't give them enough credit sometimes, that we think them being bored is a bad thing. But really, I have found they don't stay bored long because they will always find something to do. And normally whatever they're finding to do is really cool. And it's really fun to watch them come up with something to entertain themselves.
Absolutely. Caitlin, so many great thoughts about the beauty of simplifying things, about really taking back that which we do have some control over, which is our schedules and all the things that we can get crammed into. Even when you're on 100 acres, an hour outside a Target, it still takes intentionality to make sure that you are embracing those simple things. Caitlin Henderson, thank you again so much for being with me today. So appreciate your amazing thoughts. And I know that listeners will be fascinated to find out more about your farming life.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You'll find more from this episode on the show notes. Be sure and check them out at allmomdoes.com. And wanted to ask you a big favor. Be sure and go to wherever you are listening to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us get the word out about the podcast. Can't wait to see you next time on the All Mom Does podcast.